So my name's Sue Orgill. My background is in soil carbon research and development, and I was with New South Wales DPI for almost 20 years and joined Select Carbon a couple of years ago. So Select Carbon is a carbon service provider, so we partner with farmers on 25-year projects to build soil carbon using the ACCU scheme. Like, I hear you say scheme, and people refer to scheme, it sounds so dodgy when you say scheme, right? But anyway, that's what it's called, the ACCU scheme. And so I'll be talking today around what's in and what's out when you're looking at a registered soil carbon project. But given the expertise in the room, and that you've got so many expertise in local land service, in New South Wales DPI, in banks and consultants, like, please take this opportunity to ask any questions as we go along. And I'll also be joined by Chioma, who has a PhD in soil carbon as well. So super lucky when we look across the breadth of LLS expertise that you've got people that have worked in academia, in private industry, in government, and are across agriculture as well. And there's a real strength to that because there's a lot of confusion out there in the market. A soil carbon project is really good opportunity for some farmers, and some people will make money out of it and a lot of money out of it, but it's not for everyone. So it doesn't suit everyone in terms of their farming business structure, but also in terms of eligibility. So I want to cover a bit of that today. So please feel free to ask questions as we go along. Not only does she have a PhD in soil science and soil carbon science, she also knows how to click the correct button on this. So key messages from today. I'm going to start with my key message. So I am an applied soil carbon scientist, and regardless of if you've got a registered carbon farming project, the key message is you should be measuring and monitoring your soil carbon concentration. We know how to do this reliably. Most labs will offer this test, and I'll talk about the test that we use in terms of it's the dry combustion test, and it is a really important indicator of soil health. And you don't need to have a registered soil carbon project to get the value out of knowing trends in soil carbon with your different soil types on your farm and your different practices as well. So it's a really important and valuable indicator. It doesn't cost much to analyse at the lab, and there's some really good benchmarks and thresholds around soil carbon concentration as well. So that's really important. And the reason it's really important is that there's decades and decades worth of literature which shows the value, the agronomic value and landscape function value of increasing soil organic carbon on your farm. So we know that it's positively correlated. That means that as soil organic carbon concentration increases, the value increases as well in terms of water holding capacity, nutrient cycling, soil stabilization, all of these things which underpin a productive agricultural system. So it's very important. When we're talking about the soil carbon method with the ACCU scheme, it is a science-based method, which means that there needs to be clear and convincing evidence that the practice change that's going to be put in place as part of that project is likely to increase soil organic carbon. It's measurement-based, so you need to baseline and say where you're starting from. Only projects that are registered can get carbon credits issued, and carbon credits can be issued for the increase in soil organic carbon above the baseline. So you don't get carbon credits for what you've already got there. You register the project, baseline your soil organic carbon stocks. So I'm not talking about concentrations now, I'm talking about the weight of carbon for a given volume of soil, for a given mass of soil, sorry. And then you can get carbon credits issued if you can measure an increase in soil organic carbon concentration stocks. So that's really important to recognise, but it's not for everyone, but absolutely understanding and making an informed decision is. There's plenty of carbon service providers in Australia, and we've got a mature market and a method which has been in place since 2021. So in Australia, we've actually had several soil carbon methods, and I've worked on each of them from that technical and science perspective. So we had a method in 2014, which was a grazing only method. Technically, from a science perspective, it was a perfect piece of methodology. It was a dog to implement for industry. So it was very highly restrictive and very limited uptake. There was a method in 2015, which it was a modeller's dream, a modelling-based method, very, very conservative. So again, not much uptake. In 2018, the method was revised to include both crop and grazing systems, and that method has been further revised in the 2021 method, which is what we use today. So it's legislatively based, so it's a piece of legislation that underpins that method. But if we're thinking about what makes good sense, if you are engaging in a registered soil carbon project, you must be thinking about having it integrated into your farm business, so into the production system. So, and I can't stress this highly enough, it has to be around maintaining and increasing productivity and or profitability at that landscape level, and that makes for a successful carbon project. So when we're assessing projects in my team, so we're very much a science-based team, we look at these key things that are on the right-hand side of the screen here. So first of all, we're thinking about the soil's capacity to increase soil organic carbon. And that's determined by a couple of things. And I refer to it as like the size of the bucket, right? So the size of the bucket, how much carbon we can increase, because that's the creditable amount, is determined by the amount of clay and the type of clay and the initial starting concentration of soil organic carbon. So we're interested in those three key factors. So where is the farm, what is the soil type, and what level are we actually starting from? You can have a high clay soil which can stabilize and protect a lot of carbon, but if it's already under well-fertilized perennial pasture with good grazing management, the ability to increase that soil organic carbon even more, given that bucket's pretty much already full, is greatly limited. So absolutely on that farm, you're already getting the benefits of high soil organic carbon concentration, but in terms of making a good registered soil carbon project, then that might be limited. The next thing that we think about is the system's capacity to increase soil organic carbon, and that's driven by how do we increase the amount of organic matter inputs to build carbon, and how do we maintain that? So we're thinking about the levers within that farming system to get that uplift in organic matter supply. So an example of that might be going from, and these is like the golden egg kind of project, if you went from continuous cropping into a permanent pasture. So that is your massive uplift, right? So that's an extreme example. And there's other levers that we can talk about in terms of overcoming soil constraints to grow bigger, healthier plants that are suited to that climate, suited to that soil type, and managed well, and that could increase soil organic matter. So thinking about the system's capacity to change and what levers can we pull. The third thing we think about is if we can increase it, can we keep it there? It's a 25-year project and permanence is really important. So we're thinking about not only the farming system and those practices, but also the environment in which we're building carbon as well. So is it likely to be lost, and where is it building within the soil profile? And then across all of this, and this is really hard to put a number or a judgment on, but we're thinking about the farmer's capacity to implement and maintain that change. So are they, if we can identify that there's a practice, it's a responsive zone within the landscape, it's integrated into the farm business, is that grower supported, or do they have the financial and other capacity to implement that practice change and maintain it? So they're the things that we're thinking about. As Claire mentioned, we've had a Carbon Farming Act in Australia since 2011. We've got the ACCU scheme, and we've got the soil carbon method. So the soil carbon method is legislatively based. So this is the piece of legislation that underpins that carbon farming activity of building soil carbon in agricultural landscapes. As part of this method, it has a sunset date, so it means that it will finish in 2031, and there may or may not be another method after that, but this is the piece of legislation that we work for. Now, the ERAC, the Emissions Reduction Assurance Committee, is a group of scientists which review all of the methods prior to approval, and they review it based on these offset integrity standards. So to have a method registered, it needs to be a measurable change. It needs to be verifiable. It needs to be conservative estimates, because we're talking about a piece of legislation which is a climate action tool. So it's not about rewarding farmers for good land stewardship. It's about enabling practice change to drive more carbon from the atmosphere into the soil and to keep it there for longer. That is the intent of the method. There needs to be clear and convincing scientific evidence. So there's 13 eligible management practices which are in the method, and to have those practices in the method, there needs to be a body of literature to say that it is reasonably expected that those practices will increase soil carbon. Now, that's not the same as saying that all practices will work everywhere all the time. You still have to fit it back into those 3 pillars that I spoke about before around soil, the farming system, and the climatic region in which you're farming. You need to account for greenhouse gas emissions within the project area, and the change needs to be permanent. The piece of legislation outlines, it's kind of like our guidebook for registering soil carbon projects. It outlines the monitoring requirements, the labs that you can use, so it needs to be a NATA accredited lab. It outlines the depth over which we can collect soil samples. So to align with the Kyoto Protocol, for a registered soil carbon project, we're looking at the 0 to 30 centimetre depth as a minimum. At Select Carbon, we measure down to 1 metre. And we report in 2 layers, so 0 to 30 and then 30 to 1 metre. So you can get carbon credits issued for both of those layers if you can demonstrate an increase in soil organic carbon due to the practice change. It outlines those 13 eligible management activities, and it outlines the audit schedule. So there's 2 permanence periods which you can select for a registered soil carbon project, a 25-year permanence period, which is what we use. And if you select that 25-year period, so that means that from the first credit issuance, you need to maintain activities which will build soil carbon for 25 years. You don't have to maintain the same activities, so you can review your activities as required, but at least every 5 years those activities are reviewed. Or there's a 100-year permanence period, and I'm hearing that some carbon service providers are using 100 years. Like, I see Claire shaking her head, thank you. On my behalf, she's shaking her head because perhaps I can't, but if I was going to, like, so if you've got a 100-year project, that doesn't mean you get carbon credits issued for 100 years. It means that you have carbon credit, so your credit issuing period is 25 years, your obligation is 100 years. Okay, and so the reason some people may do that is that if you elect for a 25-year permanence period, there's a mandatory government discount of 20% across all the industry. So if you're going for a 25-year project, not 100 years, 20% of your carbon credits don't get issued because that's a mandatory discount. There's also another mandatory discount across all projects, which is what's called a risk of reversal buffer. So all projects are also hit with a 5% risk of reversal buffer, and that's around fire, floods and droughts. So it's like a carbon credit fund almost that sits there to buffer the ACCU scheme across those fluctuations which happen naturally within the landscape. Gemma. So the way we thought we'd do this, because you're so lucky that you've got a scientist here that's worked in the industry and now works for government. You've got a scientist that was in government and now in the industry. So talking about, you know, keeping the bastards honest, that's her job. Me, oh, that means I'm the bastard. Okay, you go. I'm not.
Thanks, Liz. So I guess my question to you today is, speaking about eligibility, I've often come across some farmers in our region who ask me this question, and I know I do respond to them, but I would like your opinion today about, okay, they've been doing all these beautiful management practices over the years, and now they can't claim credits for them. Some people might say, I've been in a room where an agronomist advised farmers to go in and flog things out and baseline. So 2 questions. Eligibility, what would be your recommendation to those farmers who thinks this is not for them, but they've been doing great things before, and now this scheme is in place and it doesn't cover what they've been doing? And secondly, should we be slashing things to get on board?
I get asked that second question all the time, and every time I get asked, like a piece of Susan Orgill dies inside. Just going, God, after working with farmers for 25 years for all of those benefits, and I hear people say, and I think, really, would you? First of all, a carbon credit is never going to be worth that much money that all the good that you've done with good management practice could be unravelled for the sake of them building it and getting some carbon credits, right? And I think everyone in the room knows that, and I know that was your intention as well. So I think that's just a highly unlikely scenario. The first question around eligibility, it's a really good one. So when I left DPI, I feel like I'd been very, very fortunate to work with some leading growers, right? And they are still, and we're doing very innovative and good practices because it made good business sense, right? So they were on top of stubble management, reducing tillage, they were using fertiliser, zoning fertiliser, using soil tests, so all the things that are those eligible management activities. And it does mean that if there's nothing that's new or materially different that you can do on your farm, you are ineligible to participate in the ACCU scheme. And that's just the way it is, right? And that's a hard message to deliver. Absolutely, then people will say, but you're getting all the benefits of carbon. And yeah, they are, of course they are, but it kind of, I think it's a bit of a kick in the guts for them because they're like, I've been doing all this stuff, right, and I can't get rewarded for it. So that's not to say you can't get rewarded in other places and with other schemes, but remember that the ACCU scheme soil carbon method is around driving practice change to get a measurable increase in soil carbon. That measurable increase generates an ACCU, so that Australian carbon credit unit, and one ACCU is equivalent to 1 tonne of carbon dioxide equivalents, okay? And the reason that that's really important is that if you sell that carbon credit that you have generated through that practice change and through that registered scheme, it could be bought by a company that will retire it because of an emission that they've made. So it needs to be genuinely different to business as usual. And that's a really important thing to remember. So when we talk about the ACCU scheme, something I actually didn't mention but is worthwhile mentioning is that when you generate carbon credits, they're not worth anything till you sell them. Okay, so if they're sitting in your carbon credit bank, called your annual account, you can keep them for as long as you want. They're not worth a value until you find a buyer. And if you're finding a buyer, so we are owned by Shell, but companies like Shell buy carbon credits off all carbon service providers. I would love to be, I said this yesterday, I would love to be running the program which could meet with soil carbon credits all of Shell's greenhouse gas emissions for Australia. But like, spoiler alert, I am not that good. So they buy carbon credits from everyone, and the idea around that is under the safeguard mechanism, Australian carbon credit units need to be purchased for emissions that can't be reduced or avoided. Okay, so they need to go to the market. Australian carbon credit units, because it's a compliance-based market, okay, so it's voluntary to participate, but for some of these big companies, it's a compliance mechanism. You can't take ACCUs outside of Australia. They can only stay within Australia. So you're looking for buyers within Australia, but because of that compliance market, that means that there is a strong and increasing demand for carbon credits here. So there's a value on them. At the moment, it's around that kind of $30-something for a carbon credit. Yep, yeah.
I guess speaking about the opportunities you've talked about and also the risk, what is feasible for farmers in our region in terms of what they can, I know science is there. There's been a lot of research you've done before in DPI as well, and even continuously doing. So what can we see? What sort of increase can we see? Speaking about the bucket we have in Central West, what is obtainable for farmers, within our region? And because I know there are some news in the news about 12.5 tons.
12.7. So a few weeks ago, there was, you kind of think you always want to be the successful company or have the biggest number, right? Unless you're a scientist like me in this industry. I want to have a number that I can rely on, that is within those scientific bounds of reasonable expectations. And another carbon service provider a few weeks ago, and it was method compliant, so the number is real according to the method, reported carbon increases and got carbon credits issued for 12.7 tonnes of soil carbon per hectare per year. Okay, so I'm not pushing this for any other reason that at the back there's our soil carbon synopsis, and it talks about all the stuff I'm talking about today. It's got select carbon brands on it, but who cares about that part? In that, or I care about that part, by the way, and business, we care about that part. But in that peer-reviewed scientific literature around reasonable bounds. So you can say, right, is this number realistic for this area? So it says in the literature, what is it reasonably expected? So I've, as I said, worked for over 20 years in this field, and in this region, we'd be looking at around that kind of 0.4 to maybe 1.2 tonnes of soil carbon per hectare per year. That would be realistic. So when we do a feasibility study with a client, we go and we look at that starting soil organic carbon level, we look at the farming system, we use models to say this is what we think the abatement estimate is. But if you just wanted to kind of get a bit of a vibe for it, have a look in that tables and see, you'll see kind of what is expected. And what we know when you increase soil organic carbon, so as I said, lower the number to start with, the bigger the uplift that you can achieve. The bigger the practice change, the bigger the uplift you can achieve. And if we have a think about it, so if we've got time on the x-axis, carbon on the y-axis, when you implement a practice change, typically what we see in the literature in our studies is that you'll get this kind of curve happening. So you'll get an uplift as you increase soil organic matter inputs to soil, and usually that big change happens within the first 10 to 15 years, and then the site will reach equilibrium. Okay, so it's a living system. Remember, as we put more organic matter into the soil, we've got soil organisms that will respond and decompose that organic matter, doing exactly what we want them to do, releasing nitrogen for our crops and pastures, creating sticky glues and things in the soil to enhance soil structure, and they'll do that. And the more you feed them, the more they'll do that. But as they do that, they respire just like us, so you'll get carbon dioxide leaving the soil. So the system will reach equilibrium. So designed well, then you think about, well, what is the next uplift? And there's some really exciting technologies. I heard a company, let's call them the company that talked about the 12.7 tonnes, talk about their secret sauce. Like, that makes me nervous. But there's some really good research being done by government and industry like GRDC, MLA and things, which are looking at nanotechnology, biostimulants, some products which are science-based, which will come onto the market in the next 10 or 15 years, where we might be able to keep cashing in on this uplift. And perhaps this is where the entry level will be for some of the clients where I've said where they're doing all the things now on those 13 eligible practices list, and that's where perhaps they can enter it. Let's roll on. So many of you have heard me describe this before, but I want to talk about it because this outlines what we're trying to achieve. Regardless of if you have a registered soil carbon project, this is what we're thinking about and talking with growers about. And we've been talking about this for a very long time. If we think about the flow of carbon around the landscape and the important considerations if we're going to build soil organic carbon. So the way we get carbon into the soil is through that process of photosynthesis. So as plants grow, they photosynthesize. They use carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, energy from the sun, nutrients and water to grow. So the longer period of photosynthesis that we can have, the greater unit area we can have photosynthesizing to maximum potential, because it's not limited by something else, the greater flow of carbon we can potentially have into the soil. So that carbon goes from a gas in the atmosphere into a liquid form and a solid form within the plants. We have carbon accumulating above ground in the form of leaves and litter, and that can be grazed by grazing animals and moved around the landscape. It can be retained when we're looking at stubble management. It goes below ground and forms roots and root exudates, so those really sticky substances which leave the plant roots, which are really, really important for microbial interactions and acquiring nutrients such as phosphorus and zinc, and creating changes in soil pH, so that's really important as well. And more than 60% of the total photosynthates are actually going below ground, and half of that are leaving the plant roots in the form of root exudates. So rapid turnover of carbon, which is really important. Once organic matter is in the soil, we start referring it as soil organic matter. So if you have standing stubble, that is not soil organic matter. And that kind of makes sense. Like, yeah, there we go. That's why I did my PhD. No, the reason I say that is when people talk about the impact of stubble management and burning, as a classic example, I was at a site a few days ago. So they were talking about burning stubble and reductions on soil organic carbon. So there's a disconnect there, right? So if you burn stubble, there's a range of reasons that that's not good, okay? but it is not burning off soil organic matter unless it's really, really hot, okay? So you're just reducing the input of organic matter into the soil. And that's why when you look at the scientific literature, there's a paucity of literature that says that if you burn stubble, you reduce soil organic carbon levels. You just don't build them, right? Because the stubble was already standing. That said, there's a range of other reasons that burning stubble could lead to a soil organic carbon decline, because you reduce ground cover and therefore you're more vulnerable to erosion. Or perhaps you don't have the ability to retain soil moisture so that you get poorer germination and crop growth following that. But there's a range of reasons that people will burn stubble as well. So I just wanted to outline that. So once organic matter is in the soil, we start to refer to as soil organic matter. As a soil scientist, that by definition, and according to the method as well, is everything that's less than 2 millimeters in length. That's really important to remember as well. So when you dig up a handful of soil and you see roots, if they're longer than 2 millimeters, they're still organic matter in soil, but it's not classified as soil organic matter. And the reason that we have that rule is to standardize it across all labs. So we know that all labs, when they receive soil samples, those samples are dried and sieved to less than 2 millimeters, and now it's comparable across labs. The other reason that's important and recognised is in the literature, a lot of the benefits of soil organic carbon over decades of papers are all related to the fraction that's less than 2 millimeters. So that's why that metric has evolved. Now, soil organic matter can be protected from microbial decomposition or physical erosion, because remember, this is a flow of carbon around the landscape, by being wrapped up nice and tight in soil aggregates, by being placed deeper down in the soil profile. So when we think about that bucket analogy earlier, the deeper you go into soil profile, the more clay there is, the less saturated the clays are with soil organic carbon, so the greater capacity you have to stabilise and store carbon. So deep subsoil carbon sequestration is really important. Practices which enhance soil structure are really important because they'll protect that carbon from the loss. So while we have this process, first of all, looking at getting more carbon into the soil, what practices will overcome by overcoming soil constraints, adequate plant nutrition, good grazing management, good crop management, matching good plant species for that soil type, for that environment, will optimise carbon into the soil. What practices will retain carbon in the soil? So looking at maintaining ground cover, enhancing soil structure through green manure crops, might be through cover crops, through grazing management, through having legumes in your crop rotation. So there's a range of different practices which will then help protect and keep carbon in the soil. Carbon can also be chemically protected in the soil when it forms those associations with clays as well, and there's certain minerals that are better added than others. And it can also be chemically protected in the form of humus. So these days it's referred to as, what's that? I was looking, I was once in a seminar with someone, let's say that she was the head of National Farmers Federation, and I'd said something at the beginning of my talk. I was like, anyone's phone rings, I'm going to answer it. And everyone's like, yeah, funny. Anyway, and let's say that this lady was sitting in the front row because she'd just spoken before me, her phone rang, and I was like, and everyone's like, do it. And I answered it, I was just like, hello, blah, blah, blah's phone. Oh no, she's really busy. No, she's in a really important talk at the moment, actually. And this is in front of the whole, and it was very funny. So I was like, do I do it? No, I'm not going to do that. So humus. So these days, so humus is that dark fraction that you see when you see the dark staining in the soil. It's basically microbial detritus, so old bugs and microbial products. These days we refer to it as mineral associated organic carbon, and it's a nice stable fraction of organic carbon. So if we can build up that stable fraction of organic carbon, it's less vulnerable to those seasonal fluctuations that we get. Also, by having carbon deeper in the profile, that's also less vulnerable to those seasonal fluctuations as well. So deep soil carbon is important for that part as well. So there's different types of carbon, but when we send our samples off to the lab, and for AccuScheme projects, it's just the total organic carbon that we're measuring, which includes all of these pools. So the rapidly turned over pool, the more stable resistant pool of mineral associated organic carbon, and also that charcoal fraction. But this is a flow of carbon around the landscape, so we've also got carbon leaving. So as I said before, if we have very hot burns, that can penetrate into the soil, but typically stubble burning doesn't. Carbon loss via erosion, so the physical removal of particles and the carbon that's associated with it. and also through that decomposition. But remembering organic matter decomposition is really agronomically desirable as long as we're maintaining that soil organic matter input. So really there's three concepts. So it's what can we do on a piece of land for that given soil type and climate which can increase photosynthesis, the right plants that aren't constrained, managed well. What can we do to increase the protection of carbon once we're building it there? Strategies to maintain cover on soil and to build soil structure. And what can we do to reduce the loss of soil organic carbon again around that cover on soil? So I've referred to carbon analysis there being total organic carbon. So the national and internationally accepted way of measuring soil organic carbon now is the dry combustion method. And sometimes on your soil test results it might be, or when you're ordering soil test results, it might be listed as the LECO or the GEWMAS test, and that's just the name of the instrument which is measured. So it's, importantly, it's not Walkley and Black anymore. So we've moved away from Walkley and Black. It's the dry combustion method, which kind of collects all of the fractions of carbon, whereas Walkley and Black used to miss some of that resistant carbon concentration. And when we get that measure back, we don't look at soil organic matter in our soil test result. That's a calculation. No labs really commercially measure soil organic matter. They measure soil organic carbon. So that's the measure that we want to look at. And that's a carbon concentration. So it's a percentage. And if it's a percentage, that means it's the same as grams of carbon per 100 grams of soil. The reason that becomes important is because when we talk about changes in soil organic carbon stocks, we're talking about a change in the mass of carbon in soil. So to calculate soil organic carbon stocks, we need the carbon concentration. We need to know the depth over which that sample was collected and the bulk density of the soil. And the bulk density is the mass of soil for a given volume. And if we have these figures, we can calculate soil carbon stocks or change in soil carbon stocks. We know that 1 ACU is equivalent to 1 carbon dioxide equivalent, and we know that 1 tonne of soil organic carbon is equivalent to 3.67 ACUs, or 3.67 tonnes of carbon dioxide. So I know I'll be running out of time. So this is the table that's in the thing at the back, the book thing. But I wanted just to run through to show you a quick whiteboard example of it. One example, do you reckon? Just how we do this. So let's say that we were going from 0.6 to 0.9 over 25 years. That's the example that we'll go from, right? So we were cropping soil. We've gone from 0.6% soil organic carbon. You're talking in the top 10 centimetres. Okay, we'll say top 10 centimetres. But remember, for a soil carbon project, we look to at least 30 centimetres. We go to 100, but let's say we're going from 0.6 to 0.9% soil organic carbon in the 0 to 10 centimetre layer. What would your bulk densities be around here? 1.2? 1.2? Excellent. So our bulk density,
Yeah, right.
I'm impatient, hey, like that was going to take you extra 1 minute. I'm just like, nah, I'm onto it, is 1.2. Okay. So the change that we're looking at over 25 years, and that's not a stupid number, right? Like lots of stupid numbers get spoken about in our industry, but that's not stupid, is 0.3. So we multiply that over the depth which we're calculating that change, which is 10 centimetres. We multiply that by the bulk density, the mass of soil for a given volume. Unless we've got Rain Man in the audience, can someone do that on a calculator? Because that is not me. I had this dude yesterday, like, he was bloody on fire. I was like... And it's always, I feel like it's always an age and stage thing, right? Like it's never the young bloke in the audience that's like telling me that, it's some old dude going, it's 3.7. Yep. 3.6, well there you go, I almost Rain Manned it. Okay, 3.6 tonnes of carbon. That was over 25 years, we've said that, right? So what's 3.6 divided by 25? So we're looking for the rate change per year. 0.14 tonnes of carbon per hectare per year. So that's the sequestration rate, right, in the top 10 centimetres. So remembering that. And if we multiply that, because we want to know how many ACUs would that be, so we're going to multiply that now by 3.67. It's almost taking us back, right? So that's 0.53 ACUs per hectare per year, right? So half an ACCU per hectare per year, right? Now, a couple of things. Remember that this change that we were talking about was only over 10 centimetres. So if we had have said that we could achieve that change over 30 centimetres, then we'd be getting like 1.5 ACCUs per hectare per year, okay? And that would mean that our sequestration rate is around that. We did not collude on this, is around that 0.4, which is what I said, around here, about 0.4 to 1.2, depending on what the practice change is per hectare per year. So reasonable bounds. So I think when you're making a decision about whether or not you enter into a carbon project and whether or not it's for you, first of all, it's worth doing your background and having a look to see whether or not it is something that's like commercially viable for you. Second of all, though, pick your partner well, because often the service agreements are for 25 years. So you have an agreement with the government for a 25-year project, and then you'll have a service agreement with a provider for 25 years as well. So it is your project as long as you're the project proponent. So that's really important. The second thing is do your homework and make sure that it's science-based and you're being realistic in your expectations about what that carbon project can deliver for you. So it's a really good opportunity for some, but it's not for everyone. And it can be risky for some people if it's not designed well. So you want to make sure that it's designed well, that it's evidence-based, and that it's integrated into your farming system, because carbon should be the add-on, not the trade-off. So when we look across our portfolio, the carbon credits maybe bring between kind of $40 and $140 per hectare per year. But when we're dealing with some of our big clients with canola and wheat, they're making a whole lot more money out of other stuff, right? But they're doing it for a range of different reasons, okay? And so absolutely it's still a benefit for some people. Good.
I wanted to ask one more question, but I'll leave it for the panel session.
Okay, cool. Yeah. No worries.